The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Lorenzo Bianchi's small apartment just outside Vatican City. He reached over to silence his alarm before it could sound. Sleep had been hard to come by, and he had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts about the day ahead. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day the world would say goodbye to Pope Benedict XVII. Lorenzo straightened his uniform and looked in the mirror. The blue, red, and yellow stripes of the Swiss Guard uniform, unchanged for over 500 years, stared back at him. He adjusted his beret carefully, making sure it sat at the perfect angle. 15 years of service had taught him that details mattered. "You look like you haven't slept," his wife Chiara said, appearing behind him with a cup of coffee. "I haven't," Lorenzo admitted, taking the cup gratefully. "How could I? This is the biggest day of my career." Chiara squeezed his shoulder. "He thought highly of you, you know. The Holy Father always stopped to speak with you when he passed." Lorenzo nodded, remembering the kind old man who had led the church for the past 12 years. Unlike some previous popes who had maintained a formal distance, Benedict XVII had made it a point to know each guard by name. He had even attended Lorenzo's promotion ceremony 5 years ago, breaking tradition to personally congratulate him. "I still can't believe he's gone," Lorenzo said quietly. The news had shocked everyone. The Pope had seemed in good health despite his age. He had been in the middle of his weekly audience when he simply closed his eyes and slumped in his chair. By the time the medical team arrived, he was already gone. A peaceful death, they said. His heart had simply stopped. Lorenzo finished his coffee and kissed Chiara goodbye. "Don't wait up," he said. "After the funeral, there will be meetings that could last well into the night." The streets near the Vatican were already filling with mourners despite the early hour. People from all over the world had flocked to Rome hoping to pay their respects. Lorenzo flashed his ID at several checkpoints before reaching the Swiss Guard barracks. Captain Paolo Rossi was waiting for him in the briefing room. At 60, Paolo was nearing retirement, but his eyes were still sharp and missed nothing. Several other senior guards were already seated around the table. "Bianchi." Paolo nodded. "Good, we're all here. Let's go through today's arrangements one final time." For the next hour, they reviewed security plans, emergency protocols, and formation details. As the most senior guard after Paolo, Lorenzo would stand at the corner of the altar platform during the funeral mass, closest to the Pope's casket. "This will be the most watched funeral in history," Paolo reminded them. "Over 2 billion people are expected to tune in. Every eye will be on the Vatican, which means every eye will be on the Swiss Guard. We represent 5 centuries of tradition and loyalty. There can be no mistakes today." He looked at each guard in turn, his gaze lingering on Lorenzo. "I need to emphasize something, especially for those of you in the inner formation. Under no circumstances are you to break position during the ceremony. Not for any reason. The security perimeter has multiple layers. If there's an issue in the crowd, the outer teams will handle it. Your job is to stand fast and maintain dignity around the Holy Father's casket. Is that understood?" The guards nodded in unison. "Lorenzo, stay behind for a moment," Paolo said as the others filed out. When they were alone, Paolo's formal demeanor softened slightly. "The Cardinal Secretary of State asked for you specifically for this position. He remembered how fond the Holy Father was of you." Lorenzo felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm honored, sir. You should be. But with that honor comes responsibility. You'll be the most visible guard during the ceremony. The cameras will catch every blink, every twitch. I know you understand the importance of protocol, but today it matters more than ever." "I won't let you down, sir," Lorenzo promised. "I know you won't." Paolo clasped his shoulder. "Get something to eat. We form up in 3 hours." Lorenzo headed to the cafeteria, but food was the last thing on his mind. Instead, he found himself walking to the small chapel where the guards often prayed before duty. The chapel was empty. Lorenzo knelt in the front pew and bowed his head. He wasn't sure what to pray for exactly. The Pope was already gone, his soul already commended to God according to their faith. Instead, Lorenzo found himself thanking God for the privilege of serving such a kind-hearted leader. He remembered his first meeting with Benedict XVII, just months after the Pope's election. Lorenzo had been on duty at the Apostolic Palace when the Pope had stopped to ask his name. "Lorenzo Bianchi, Your Holiness," he had replied, nervous and stiff. "Bianchi, are you from northern Italy then?" the Pope had asked. "Yes, Your Holiness." a small town near Milan. I visited Milan often as a cardinal. Beautiful city. How long have you served in the guard, Lorenzo? Just 3 years, Your Holiness. The Pope had smiled. Well, I am new to my position too. Perhaps we can learn together, yes? That brief exchange had been the beginning of a relationship that, while still formal, had felt personal. Whenever the Pope passed Lorenzo on duty, he would nod and sometimes stop for a brief word. Once he had even asked after Lorenzo's family when he learned Chiara was expecting their first child. A small sound interrupted Lorenzo's thoughts. He looked up to see Cardinal Taddeo Conti, the Secretary of State, entering the chapel. "I'm sorry to disturb your prayers, Lorenzo," the Cardinal said softly. "Not at all. Your Eminence," Lorenzo stood quickly. "Please, sit with me for a moment." The Cardinal settled into the pew and Lorenzo sat beside him. "I wanted to speak with you before the ceremony. I know Captain Rossi has already briefed you, but I felt I should see you personally." The Cardinal looked tired. As the Pope's right hand, he had been working around the clock since the death, managing the funeral arrangements while also preparing for the conclave that would elect the next Pope. "His Holiness thought very highly of you," Cardinal Conti said. "Did you know that?" "He was kind to everyone, Your Eminence." "True, but he mentioned you specifically several times. He appreciated your dedication and your gentle manner. He said you reminded him of his own brother who passed many years ago." Lorenzo hadn't known this, and the revelation brought fresh grief. "The Holy Father believed in the importance of mercy above all else," the Cardinal continued. "He often said that rules and traditions are important, but they should serve people, not the other way around." Lorenzo nodded, unsure why the Cardinal was telling him this now. "Today will test all of us," Cardinal Conti sighed. "Over 4,000 guests will be in the Basilica, including heads of state from around the world. Hundreds of thousands more will fill the square. Security is, of course, paramount. We're well prepared, Your Eminence. I know you are. But sometimes," the Cardinal hesitated, "sometimes life presents us with moments where we must choose between what is expected and what is right. In those moments, I believe the Holy Father would want us to remember his teachings on mercy and compassion." Before Lorenzo could ask what he meant, the Cardinal stood. "I should go. There are still preparations to oversee. God be with you today, Lorenzo. And with you, Your Eminence." The hours passed quickly after that. Lorenzo joined his fellow guards for a light meal, though he barely tasted the food. Soon it was time to assemble in formation. The atmosphere in St. Peter's Square was unlike anything Lorenzo had experienced in his 15 years of service. A sea of people stretched as far as the eye could see, yet there was a hush over the crowd. Many held candles despite the daylight, their flames barely visible in the bright September sun. Inside the basilica, world leaders, royalty, and religious figures from every faith took their places. Lorenzo stood at attention at his assigned spot, his halberd held perfectly straight, his eyes fixed forward as trained. From his position he could see the Pope's casket, adorned with a simple cross and the papal insignia. As the funeral mass began, Lorenzo maintained his position with the precision that had made the Swiss Guard famous for centuries. Cardinals in their red vestments moved with solemn dignity through the ancient rituals. Prayers in Latin echoed through the vast space of the basilica. Lorenzo felt a deep sense of pride mixed with sadness. This was his duty, to stand as a symbol of the Guard's eternal promise to protect the Pope, a promise that extended even to this final farewell. He knew the cameras were capturing every moment, broadcasting the ceremony to billions around the world. What Lorenzo didn't know was that before the day ended, he would make a decision that would break 500 years of protocol and change his life forever. The funeral mass continued with the rhythm of ancient tradition. Cardinals moved through the rituals with practiced precision, their red vestments bright against the somber backdrop of St. Peter's Basilica. Incense filled the air, its sweet scent mixing with the fragrance of thousands of white lilies surrounding the Pope's casket. Lorenzo maintained his position, standing straight as an arrow at the corner of the altar platform. His muscles ached from holding the same stance for nearly 2 hours, but years of training had taught him to ignore such discomfort. The weight of the ceremonial halberd in his hands felt like an extension of his own body. Through the massive doors of the basilica, Lorenzo could see the crowds filling St. Peter's Square. The September sun beat down, yet no one seemed willing to leave even as the ceremony stretched on. Many held photos of Pope Benedict XVII. Some clutched rosaries and others simply stood with heads bowed in prayer. Inside, the dignitaries sat in perfect rows. Presidents, prime ministers, kings, and queens, many of whom disagreed fiercely in the political arena, sat shoulder to shoulder in a rare moment of unity. Lorenzo recognized most of them from countless security briefings. His eyes briefly caught the gaze of the Italian prime minister, who gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Cardinal Taddeo Conti now stood at the altar, delivering the final eulogy. His voice, amplified by the microphones, carried throughout the basilica and to the speakers in the square beyond. Benedict XVI reminded us that the Church exists not as a monument to tradition, but as a living witness to compassion, the Cardinal was saying. He taught us that rules, while necessary, must always bend to the greater law of love. Lorenzo felt those words resonate with what the Cardinal had told him earlier in the chapel. He wondered again why the Cardinal had sought him out specifically before the ceremony. As the eulogy concluded, the choir began a haunting rendition of In Paradisum, the ancient chant that had accompanied the faithful to their final rest for centuries. The pure voices seemed to float upward to the dome of the basilica, as if escorting the Pope's soul to heaven. It was then that Lorenzo noticed a disturbance at the edge of his vision. Near the barriers separating the main body of the basilica from the restricted funeral area, an elderly woman seemed to be in distress. She was small, perhaps in her 80s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her hand was pressed against her chest, and even from a distance, Lorenzo could see that her face had gone alarmingly pale. Two people beside her, a middle-aged man and woman who looked like they might be her children, were trying to support her, but she appeared to be growing weaker by the second. The son was looking around frantically, clearly seeking help, but the Vatican ushers stationed in that section were focused on the ceremony and hadn't noticed. Lorenzo felt his heart rate increase. The woman was no more than 30 feet from him, just beyond the security line. He could clearly see her now slumping further, her knees beginning to buckle. Captain Paolo's instructions echoed in his mind. Under no circumstances are you to break position during the ceremony. Not for any reason, but something else tugged at his conscience. The Cardinal's words. Sometimes life presents us with moments where we must choose between what is expected and what is right. The elderly woman's hand dropped from her chest, revealing something that caught Lorenzo's eye, a small medal hanging from a ribbon around her neck. Even from this distance, he recognized it instantly. It was the Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice, one of the highest honors the Vatican bestowed on lay people who had provided exceptional service to the Church and the Pope. These medals were not given lightly. Whoever this woman was, she had done something significant enough to earn the Pope's personal recognition. She was falling now, her children struggling to hold her up. No one else was moving to help. All eyes fixed on the ceremony, the changing of the guard happening at the other end of the altar, distracting any who might have noticed. 500 years of tradition told Lorenzo to stay put. 15 years of training commanded him to keep his eyes forward. The eyes of the world were watching. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for hung in the balance, yet something stronger than tradition stirred within him. In that moment, Lorenzo thought of what Pope Benedict XVI would do if he were still alive and saw someone suffering during one of his ceremonies. The decision seemed to make itself. Lorenzo stepped away from his. The movement was so unexpected, so contrary to everything the Swiss Guard represented, that several nearby cardinals turned to look at him in shock. The guard positioned across from him widened his eyes in disbelief, but Lorenzo was already moving with purpose across the marble floor, his boots echoing in the sudden pocket of silence that had formed around him. He was acutely aware of the cameras following his movement, broadcasting his protocol breach to the entire world. He reached the security line and crossed it without hesitation, making his way to the elderly woman who had now collapsed fully into her son's arms. "I'm a trained first responder," Lorenzo said, setting his halberd against a nearby pillar. "Please let me help." The woman's son looked up in surprise at the Swiss guard suddenly before him. "She has a heart condition," he explained quickly. "She insisted on coming. She wouldn't miss it, but I think it's been too much for her." Lorenzo knelt beside them, loosening the collar of the woman's dress and checking her pulse. It was rapid but present. Her breathing was shallow, What's her name? Lorenzo asked, taking the woman's hand. Sophia, the daughter replied. Sophia Rossi, Sophia, Lorenzo said gently. Can you hear me? I'm Lorenzo from the Swiss Guard. I'm here to help you. The woman's eyelids fluttered and she looked up at him with cloudy blue eyes. The ceremony? She whispered. Is it over? Did I ruin it? No, Lorenzo assured her. Everything is continuing. You haven't ruined anything, but we need to get you some medical attention. He looked up and caught the eye of one of the Vatican security personnel who had finally noticed the situation. Lorenzo gestured urgently and the man spoke into his radio. Help is coming, Lorenzo told Sophia and her children. Just try to stay calm and breathe slowly. The woman's hand tightened around his. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. He would have done the same, you know. Benedict always put people before protocol. Even as a boy, Lorenzo froze. The way she said the Pope's name, not as Pope Benedict or His Holiness, but simply as Benedict, and the reference to him as a boy caught him completely off guard. Before he could ask what she meant, 2 Vatican medical staff arrived with a wheelchair. As they transferred Sophia into it, Lorenzo noticed that her medal had become tangled in her scarf. He carefully freed it and properly positioned it over her heart. This is a great honor, he said, touching the medal respectfully. How did you come to receive it? A small smile crossed Sophia's face despite her obvious pain. For teaching, she said. I was his teacher when he was just a small boy. 1st grade. Before anyone knew he would become... She gestured weakly toward the altar where the Pope's casket lay. The medics were ready to take her away now. We'll get her to the Vatican Medical Center, one of them assured the family. Sophia's son turned to Lorenzo with tears in his eyes. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. I only did what anyone would do, Lorenzo interrupted, suddenly very aware that he had abandoned his post and broken centuries of tradition. The reality of what he had done was beginning to sink in. As the medical team wheeled Sophia away, Lorenzo turned back toward the altar. The ceremony was continuing, but he could see Captain Paolo watching him from across the basilica, his face unreadable. With no choice but to face the consequences of his decision, Lorenzo retrieved his halberd and walked back toward his position. Each step felt heavier than the last. He was keenly aware of the eyes on him, not just those physically present in the basilica, but the countless millions watching on television screens around the world. What had he done? 500 years of perfect discipline, of unwavering adherence to protocol, and he had broken it. As he resumed his position, standing at attention as if nothing had happened, his mind raced with the potential consequences. Would he be dismissed from the Guard? Would his name become synonymous with disgrace? Yet despite these fears, Lorenzo couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. The woman, Sophia, had known the Pope as a boy. She had taught him, shaped him in some small way, and she wore the medal to prove her service to the church he had led. As the ceremony drew to a close, Lorenzo's eyes drifted to the Pope's casket. He wondered what Benedict XVII would have thought of his actions. Would he have been disappointed in the breaking of sacred tradition? Or would he have approved of prioritizing compassion over protocol? Lorenzo wouldn't have to wait long to find out what others thought. As the final blessing was given, and the pallbearers prepared to carry the Pope's casket for the private interment ceremony, Captain Paolo caught Lorenzo's eye across the altar and gave a small, sharp gesture. Report immediately after the ceremony. The news cameras might have captured his breach of protocol, but they couldn't see the storm that was about to break over Lorenzo's head. Whatever came next, his life as a Swiss Guard would never be the same. The private interment ceremony had concluded, and the heavy doors to the papal crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica were closed. Pope Benedict XVI now rested alongside his predecessors in the sacred space that few visitors ever saw. Lorenzo stood at attention outside the Swiss Guard headquarters, waiting to be called into Captain Paolo's office. The rest of the Guard had been dismissed to change out of their ceremonial uniforms, but Lorenzo had been ordered to remain in full dress. The bright colors of his Renaissance-inspired uniform, usually a source of pride, now felt like a spotlight on his transgression. Through the windows, he could see other guards glancing at him as they passed. Some looked sympathetic, others confused, and a few seemed almost angry. News traveled fast within the close-knit community of the Guard. Bianchi, the sharp voice of Lieutenant Vittorio Russo cut through the air. The captain will see you now." Lorenzo took a deep breath and followed Vittorio into the building. The lieutenant, a stern man with 20 years of service, didn't look at him as they walked down the hallway to the captain's office. "Good luck," Vittorio muttered just before knocking on the heavy wooden door. It was the closest thing to sympathy Lorenzo expected to receive. "Enter," came Paolo's voice from inside. Lorenzo stepped into the office and stood at attention, eyes fixed on the wall behind Paolo's desk where the Swiss Guard oath hung in an ornate frame. He had recited that oath 15 years ago, swearing to protect the Pope with his own life if necessary. Nowhere in that oath did it mention helping elderly women during ceremonies. Paolo was not alone. 2 other men sat in chairs to the side of his desk: Colonel Albrecht Schmidt, the overall commander of the Swiss Guard, and Bishop Franco Esposito, the Vatican official responsible for ceremonial matters. "Guard Bianchi," Paolo said, his voice carefully controlled. "Do you understand why you are here?" "Yes, Captain," Lorenzo replied, still staring straight ahead. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Paolo ordered. Lorenzo lowered his gaze to meet his superior's eyes. What he saw there wasn't just anger. There was disappointment, which felt far worse. 15 years, Paolo said quietly. 15 years of exemplary service. You've protected 3 popes. You've earned commendations for your dedication. You are on track to become a lieutenant, possibly even to take my position one day. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on his desk. "And you threw it all away for what? To play hero in front of the cameras?" "No, sir," Lorenzo said. "The woman needed help." "The woman," Paolo cut him off, "could have been helped by any of the 20 medical staff on duty, or by the Vatican security personnel, or by the ushers. But instead you, one of only 12 guards selected for the innermost ceremonial detail, abandoned your post during the most watched funeral in history." Colonel Schmidt cleared his throat. "Over 2 billion people, Bianchi. 2 billion people watched you break 500 years of protocol." Bishop Esposito added, "My office has already received calls from every major news organization wanting to know who you are and why you left your position." "Sir," Lorenzo tried again. "She was wearing the Pro Ecclesiae Pontifice medal. She knew the Pope when he was a child." "I don't care if she was the Pope's own mother," Paolo interrupted. "Your duty was clear. You had one job today, Bianchi, one job: to stand at attention and represent the honor and discipline of the Swiss Guard." Lorenzo fell silent. There was nothing he could say that would make them understand. Perhaps he didn't fully understand it himself, why that particular moment had compelled him to act against everything he had been trained to do. "The damage is done," Colonel Schmidt said, his Swiss-German accent more pronounced than usual. "Now we must contain it." "Exactly," the bishop nodded. "The Vatican press office is preparing a statement. We need to decide what happens to Guard Bianchi before the story spins completely out of our control." Captain Paolo rubbed his temples. Normally this would be simple. Immediate dismissal from the Guard for dereliction of duty. But with the media attention, we need to be careful. The words hit Lorenzo like a physical blow. Dismissal. The end of his career, his purpose, his identity as a Swiss Guard. He had known it was possible, even likely, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "If I may, sirs," Lieutenant Vittorio said from the doorway where he still stood, "there's something else you should know." All eyes turned to him. The woman Guard Bianchi assisted. Her name is Sofia Rossi. She's stable at the Vatican Medical Center, but there's more. Her son just showed me some documents. She was indeed the Holy Father's first-grade teacher, but she was also named specifically in his personal will. This revelation caused even Paolo to look surprised. "What do you mean, named specifically?" Colonel Schmidt asked. Apparently, the Pope left her a personal letter and requested that she be given a place of honor at his funeral. Due to an administrative oversight, this request was never fulfilled. The family has copies of correspondence confirming this. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Bishop Esposito looked particularly disturbed by this information. "Why wasn't I informed of this?" He asked no one in particular. It appears the request was routed through the Pope's private secretary, who passed it to the Office of Papal Ceremonies. But with the chaos following the Holy Father's sudden death, Vittorio let the explanation trail off. Everyone knew how disorganized things had been in those first days. Paolo looked back at Lorenzo with new eyes. "Did you know about this request when you broke formation?" "No, sir," Lorenzo answered honestly. I only knew she wore the medal and appeared to be in distress. I learned about her connection to the Pope only after I reached her. This complicates things, Colonel Schmidt said carefully. Bishop Esposito stood up suddenly. I need to speak with the Cardinal Secretary of State immediately. This changes the narrative completely. He hurried from the room, already pulling out his phone. Paolo dismissed Vittorio with a nod, then turned back to Lorenzo. You're confined to barracks until further notice. No communication with anyone outside the guard, especially not the press. Understood? Yes, sir. Dismissed. Lorenzo saluted and left the office, his mind whirling with this new information. The Pope had wanted Sofia at his funeral, had specifically requested it in his will, and somehow through a series of mistakes and oversights, that wish had been ignored, until Lorenzo had seen her medal and gone to her aid. Back in the barracks, Lorenzo found his roommate Antonio waiting anxiously. What happened? Antonio asked as soon as Lorenzo closed the door. Are you being dismissed? I don't know yet, Lorenzo admitted, finally allowing himself to sink onto his bed. It's complicated. The whole guard is talking about it, Antonio said. And you're all over the internet, look. He held out his phone, showing a news website with the headline, Swiss Guard breaks protocol, act of defiance or compassion. Below was a photo of Lorenzo kneeling beside Sofia, his bright uniform standing out against the more somber colors around them. There are other articles too, Antonio continued, scrolling through his phone. 5 centuries of tradition broken in an instant. Who is the mystery woman helped by Papal Guard? They're calling you the Human Guard on social media, Lorenzo groaned. This is exactly what the captain was worried about. But why did you do it? Antonio asked. You know the rules better than anyone. Lorenzo was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. It felt like the right thing to do, he finally said. I saw someone suffering and I could help. In that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. Even your career? Everything you've worked for? Even that. Antonio shook his head, clearly unable to understand. Well, you might not be dismissed after all. There's a rumor going around that the woman has some connection to the Pope. She was his teacher when he was a boy, Lorenzo confirmed, and apparently he mentioned her in his will. He wanted her at the funeral. Antonio's eyes widened. So you actually fulfilled the Pope's wishes by helping her? That's incredible. I didn't know that at the time, Lorenzo reminded him. I just saw someone who needed help. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lieutenant Vittorio stood there, his expression unreadable. Bianchi, the Cardinal Secretary of State, wants to see you. Now. Lorenzo felt a chill run down his spine. The Cardinal Secretary was second only to the Pope himself in the Vatican hierarchy. This was either very good news or very bad news. Should I change first, sir? Lorenzo asked, gesturing to his ceremonial uniform. No time, Vittorio replied. He's waiting. As Lorenzo followed Vittorio through the Vatican corridors, his mind raced with possibilities. Was the Cardinal going to personally dismiss him from the guard? Or was there something else happening? They arrived at the Cardinal's office, where 2 priests stood outside the door. They nodded to Vittorio and opened the door for Lorenzo. Guard Bianchi, Cardinal Taddeo Conti greeted him, rising from behind his desk. Please come in. The Cardinal wasn't alone. Bishop Esposito was there, along with another man Lorenzo didn't recognize, a thin, scholarly-looking priest who sat quietly in the corner with a notebook. Your Eminence, Lorenzo said, bowing slightly. You wanted to see me? Yes, the Cardinal said, gesturing for Lorenzo to sit. We have a rather extraordinary situation on our hands. Bishop Esposito has informed me about Sofia Rossi and her connection to the Holy Father. Lorenzo nodded but remained silent. What you may not know, the Cardinal continued, is that we have now found a letter in the Pope's personal quarters. It was written just 3 days before his death. The Cardinal picked up a piece of paper from his desk. In it, he specifically mentions you, Guard Bianchi. He writes that your compassion reminded him of what the Church should stand for, putting people before procedures. Lorenzo felt a lump forming in his throat. He wrote that about me? Indeed, the Cardinal said with a small smile. It seems the Holy Father was quite observant. He noted several occasions when you showed particular kindness to visitors or pilgrims while on duty. The quiet priest in the corner spoke up. As his personal secretary, I can confirm His Holiness often commented on members of the Guard. He had a special appreciation for those who balanced their duties with humanity. Lorenzo didn't know what to say. The Pope had noticed him, had written about him. The thought was overwhelming. "So you see," the cardinal said, leaning forward, "what happened today takes on a different meaning in light of these discoveries. What seemed like a breach of protocol may in fact have been something else entirely. What happens now, Your Eminence?" Lorenzo asked. Cardinal Conti exchanged glances with Bishop Esposito. "That is what we need to discuss. The world is watching, Guard Bianchi. How we respond to this situation will send a powerful message about what kind of church we want to be." The following morning, Lorenzo found himself walking through the quiet corridors of the Vatican archives. The massive underground repository housed centuries of documents, letters, and records, the collective memory of the Church. Few people outside the Vatican's inner circle ever got to see this place. Father Domenico Ricci, the Pope's former personal secretary, led the way. The thin, scholarly priest had been tasked by Cardinal Conti with uncovering the full story of Sophia Rossi's connection to Pope Benedict XVI. "Most of these records have been digitized," Father Domenico explained as they passed endless rows of shelves. "But what we're looking for is too personal, too unofficial to have made it into the digital archives." They reached a section marked Personal Correspondence, Benedict XVII. The Holy Father was meticulous about preserving his letters, Father Domenico said, pulling out a key to unlock one of the cabinets. Even from before his papacy. Inside were dozens of boxes, each carefully labeled with dates and categories. Father Domenico selected one marked Early Years Personal and carried it to a nearby table. "Why am I here?" Lorenzo asked. After yesterday's meeting with the cardinal, he had been told only to report to the archives this morning. No explanation, no indication of whether he was still in trouble or somehow redeemed. Father Domenico looked up from the box he was opening. "Because the cardinal believes you should understand the full context of what happened yesterday. And because," he hesitated, "the Holy Father would have wanted you to know." The priest began carefully removing folders from the box. Sophia Rossi wasn't just the Pope's first-grade teacher. Their connection runs much deeper than that. He selected a folder and opened it, revealing a stack of letters, some yellowed with age. "These are letters from Sophia to the Pope, dating back to when he was just a boy named Matteo Ricci, growing up in a small village outside Rome." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "The Pope's birth name was Ricci? Like yours?" Father Domenico smiled softly. "Yes, he was my uncle." Most people forget that popes had families and lives before they were called to lead the church. He handed Lorenzo a letter from the stack. The paper was thin, the handwriting neat, but clearly from another era. "October 15th, 1955, Lorenzo read aloud. "My dear Matteo, I was so proud to hear of your excellent grades this term. Your essay on St. Francis that you shared with me shows a depth of understanding rare in one so young. Sophia was more than a teacher to him," Father Domenico explained. "She recognized something special in my uncle from an early age. His parents, my grandparents, were simple people. Good people, but they didn't understand his intellectual gifts or his spiritual calling. Sophia did." Lorenzo carefully returned the letter and Father Domenico handed him another. This one from the 1960s. She encouraged him to pursue the priesthood when his father wanted him to take over the family business. Father Domenico continued. She helped him apply for seminary scholarships. When he doubted his path, her letters reassured him. Letter after letter revealed a relationship that spanned decades. As Matteo Ricci rose through the ranks of the church, from priest to bishop to cardinal, Sophia remained a constant presence in his life, a trusted advisor and friend. They wrote to each other every month for over 70 years, Father Domenico said, opening another box filled with more recent correspondence. Even after he became pope, he would personally write to her outside the official channels. Lorenzo picked up a letter dated just 3 years ago. The handwriting was shakier now, but still recognizable as the same hand that had written the childhood letters. "My dear Sophia," it read, "as I approach my 80th birthday, I find myself reflecting on the many hands that have guided me on my journey. None were more important than yours. The seeds of faith and service you planted in a restless 7-year-old boy have bloomed into a life I could never have imagined." She kept every letter he ever sent her, Father Domenico said. After she received the Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice medal 5 years ago, She donated them to the Vatican archives, over 800 letters in total. A remarkable historical record. But if they were so close, why wasn't she given a place of honor at the funeral? Lorenzo asked. The lieutenant mentioned something about the Pope's will. Father Domenico's expression darkened. That's where things went wrong. The Holy Father's death was so sudden, so unexpected. In the chaos that followed, many details were overlooked. He pulled out a thin folder labeled Final Wishes and opened it to reveal a letter sealed with the papal insignia. This was found in his private study yesterday after your incident at the funeral. It's dated just 1 week before his death. The letter was addressed to Cardinal Conti. In it, the Pope requested that Sophia Rossi be given a place of honor at his funeral, as the woman who first showed me the path I was meant to walk. A copy of this letter was sent to the Office of Papal Ceremonies, Father Domenico explained. But during the funeral preparations, with hundreds of world leaders confirming attendance and security concerns mounting, somehow Sophia's invitation was never properly processed. She received a standard ticket for the general seating area, not the VIP section where she belonged. Lorenzo felt a wave of sadness wash over him. So she came anyway, despite not receiving the proper invitation? Yes. At 86 years old with a heart condition, she traveled from her village to say goodbye to the boy she had taught so many years ago. She wouldn't have missed it for anything. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the physical evidence of a lifelong friendship that had shaped the church in ways few people would ever know. There's one more letter you should see, Father Domenico said finally. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. Unlike the others, this one was crisp and new. This was found in the Pope's private chapel in his prayer book. It was never sent. The envelope was addressed simply to Sophia with no mailing address. Father Domenico handed it to Lorenzo. The Cardinal believes you should be the one to read it first. Lorenzo carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was shaky but determined, as if the writer had taken great care with each word. My dearest Sophia, by the time you read this I will have gone to meet our Lord. Do not grieve for me, for I have lived a full life in service to the church we both love. As I prepare for this final journey, my thoughts turn again and again to that classroom where you first taught me about faith and compassion. You showed me that rules and doctrine, while important, mean nothing without love. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life, one you would say, quoting St. Paul. I have tried to lead the church with that wisdom in mind, though I have not always succeeded. Tradition and protocol so easily become walls rather than bridges. Which brings me to a request, my old friend. At my funeral, there will be pomp and circumstance as protocol demands. There will be world leaders and dignitaries, cardinals and bishops. But I ask that you be given a place of honor among them, not because of your title or position, but because of your impact. Sometimes I look at the church today and worry we have forgotten what matters most. Perhaps my final gift can be a reminder that it is not the grandest or most powerful who deserve our highest respect, but those who shape souls with simple acts of love and wisdom. Thank you for teaching this lesson to a small boy so many years ago. May those who lead the church after me have the wisdom to keep it close to their hearts. With eternal gratitude, Matteo. Lorenzo felt tears welling in his eyes as he finished reading. The Pope's final letter to his beloved teacher had never reached her. Yet somehow, through Lorenzo's unplanned act of compassion, the Pope's wish that Sophia be honored had come true in an unexpected way. The Holy Father believed deeply in divine providence, Father Domenico said softly. He would have seen no coincidence in you being the one to help Sophia, or in the fact that you broke protocol to do so. Exactly the kind of spirit-over-letter action he references in his letter. I didn't know any of this when I left my post, Lorenzo said, carefully folding the letter and returning it to its envelope. Which makes what you did all the more meaningful, Father Domenico replied. You acted purely out of compassion, just as he would have wanted. The priest gathered the letters and returned them to their boxes. The Cardinal Secretary wanted you to understand the full context before he makes his decision about your future with the Swiss Guard. Lorenzo's heart sank slightly at the reminder that his fate was still undecided. When will I know? He's meeting with the Colonel and Captain Paolo now. They've asked us to join them when we're finished here. As they walked back through the labyrinthine archives, Lorenzo's mind was spinning with everything he had learned. The Pope's relationship with Sophia spanned nearly his entire life. Her influence had helped shape the man who would eventually lead the Catholic Church. And now, through a series of events no one could have predicted, Lorenzo had become part of their story. "How is Sophia doing?" he asked as they neared the exit. "Much better," Father Domenico said. "The doctors say she can leave the medical center tomorrow. Her heart episode was brought on by emotion and exhaustion, but there's no permanent damage." "Will she ever know about the letter? About how the Pope wanted her to be honored?" Father Domenico paused at the door. "That depends on what happens next. The Cardinal is concerned about how this story is unfolding in the media. The narrative needs to be handled carefully." Lorenzo nodded, understanding the delicate position the Vatican found itself in. His actions had created a public relations situation that could either damage the Church's image or, if managed correctly, become something positive. "Whatever happens with my position in the Guard," Lorenzo said, "I'm glad I know the truth now. About Sophia and the Pope." "The truth has a way of coming to light," Father Domenico replied, "even when it takes unexpected paths to get there." As they stepped out of the archives into the sunlight of the Vatican gardens, Lorenzo spotted Cardinal Conti waiting for them near the fountain. The Cardinal's expression was solemn but not unkind. Whatever decision had been made about Lorenzo's future, the time had come to hear it. 3 days had passed since the Pope's funeral, and the world was still talking about the Swiss guard who had broken protocol. News outlets had pieced together parts of the story. They knew the elderly woman was Sophia Rossi, a recipient of the Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice Medal and the Pope's childhood teacher. But the full depth of their connection remained private, known only to a select few within the Vatican. Lorenzo stood at the window of his small apartment, gazing out at the morning light washing over St. Peter's Square. Chiara moved quietly behind him, preparing breakfast. "Are you nervous?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee on the table. Lorenzo turned from the window with a small smile. "Surprisingly, no. Whatever happens today, I know I did the right thing." Today was the day the Vatican would make its official announcement regarding Lorenzo's actions and his future with the Swiss Guard. Cardinal Conti had been surprisingly tight-lipped during their meeting in the gardens, saying only that a decision had been made but needed to be finalized with a few more officials. "Will you be able to find other work if—" Chiara didn't finish the sentence, but her concern was clear. "Let's not worry about that until we have to," Lorenzo said, sitting down at the table. He took a sip of coffee, savoring the familiar ritual that now felt precious, knowing his life might soon change dramatically. His phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Vittorio. "Car will pick you up at 9 quad, formal uniform required." Lorenzo checked the time, just over an hour to prepare. The formal uniform requirement could mean anything. It was standard for official ceremonies but also for dismissals. At least he would face whatever came with dignity. At precisely 9, a black Vatican car pulled up outside. To Lorenzo's surprise, Lieutenant Vittorio himself was driving. "Good morning," Vittorio said as Lorenzo slid into the passenger seat. His tone gave nothing away. "Good morning, Lieutenant. I didn't expect you to be my driver." Vittorio pulled away from the curb. "Captain Paolo thought it best if your arrival was handled discreetly." They drove in silence through the streets of Rome. Lorenzo noticed they weren't heading toward the Swiss Guard, barracks, or even the main administrative offices of the Vatican. Instead, they were taking the route to the Apostolic Palace, where the most important Vatican ceremonies were held. "Where exactly are we going?" Lorenzo finally asked. "The Clementine Hall," Vittorio replied. Lorenzo's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Clementine Hall was one of the grandest reception rooms in the Vatican, used for important diplomatic events and papal audiences. Why would his case be addressed there? When they arrived, Vittorio led Lorenzo through a side entrance, avoiding the main corridors where tourists and pilgrims might recognize him. They walked in silence until they reached a small anteroom adjacent to the Clementine Hall. "Wait here," Vittorio instructed. "Someone will come for you shortly." Left alone, Lorenzo straightened his uniform and tried to quiet his racing thoughts. Through the door, he could hear the murmur of many voices in the hall beyond. It seemed there was a substantial gathering taking place, hardly the setting for a private dismissal. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened and Father Domenico appeared. "It's time," he said with a gentle smile. "Don't worry. Just follow my lead." Lorenzo followed the priest to the main doors of the Clementine Hall. 2 Swiss guards stood at attention there, Guards Lorenzo knew well, though they kept their eyes forward, giving no indication of recognition. Father Domenico paused before the doors. The Holy Father always believed that everything happens for a reason, Lorenzo. Remember that. Before Lorenzo could respond, the priest nodded to the guards, who opened the double doors to reveal the Clementine Hall in all its Renaissance splendor. The vast room was filled with people, cardinals in their red robes, bishops, Vatican officials, and members of the diplomatic corps. At the front of the room, seated on a raised platform, were Cardinal Conti, Colonel Schmidt, and Captain Paolo, and next to them, in a wheelchair but sitting straight and dignified, was Sophia Rossi. Every head turned as Lorenzo entered. The room fell silent. Father Domenico guided him down the central aisle toward the platform. Lorenzo felt hundreds of eyes watching his every move, but he kept his focus on Sophia, whose face brightened with recognition as he approached. When they reached the front, Father Domenico guided Lorenzo to stand before the cardinal. Lorenzo snapped to attention, as years of training had ingrained in him. Cardinal Conti rose from his chair and addressed the assembly. 3 days ago, the world witnessed an unprecedented moment during the funeral of our beloved Pope Benedict XVII, a member of the Swiss Guard, an organization known for 5 centuries of unwavering discipline and adherence to protocol, broke formation to assist an elderly woman in distress. The cardinal paused, his eyes scanning the room. In the days since, there has been much speculation about this incident. Some have called it a breach of sacred tradition. Others have hailed it as an act of compassion. Today we gather to address this matter officially and to share with you the remarkable circumstances surrounding it. He gestured to Sophia. This is Sophia Rossi, who was Pope Benedict XVII's teacher when he was a boy named Matteo Ricci. What few people know is that she remained his trusted friend and advisor throughout his life, exchanging letters with him for over 70 years. A murmur ran through the crowd. In his final days, Pope Benedict wrote a letter requesting that Sophia be given a place of honor at his funeral. Due to a series of administrative oversights in the confusion following his sudden death, this wish was not fulfilled. The cardinal then turned to Lorenzo. Guard Lorenzo Bianchi had no knowledge of this when he left his post to assist Sophia. He acted purely out of compassion when he saw her Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice medal and realized she was in distress. In doing so, he unknowingly fulfilled the Pope's wish that she be honored. Lorenzo stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as the cardinal continued. After careful consideration and prayer, consulting with the College of Cardinals and the leaders of the Swiss Guard, we have made our decision regarding Guard Bianchi's actions. The room was completely silent now. Lorenzo could hear his own heartbeat. The Swiss Guard has stood for centuries as a symbol of unwavering discipline and adherence to tradition. This is a value the Church holds dear. But Pope Benedict XVII also taught us that the Church must be, above all, a witness to compassion and love. Rules and protocols exist to serve people, not the other way around. Cardinal Conti stepped forward and, to Lorenzo's astonishment, extended his hand. Guard Bianchi rather than punishment. You will receive a commendation for embodying the true spirit of service that Pope Benedict advocated throughout his papacy. Your actions remind us all that sometimes the highest form of duty is responding to human need with love. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a spontaneous burst of applause. Lorenzo shook the cardinal's hand, too stunned to speak. Colonel Schmidt stepped forward next, holding a small box. In recognition of your actions, and to honor the memory of Pope Benedict XVII, we are establishing a new award, the Benedict XVII Medal of Compassionate Service. You, Guard Bianchi, will be its first recipient. He opened the box to reveal a silver medal bearing the papal insignia on one side, and on the other, an engraving of 2 hands reaching toward each other. As the colonel pinned the medal to Lorenzo's uniform, Captain Paolo approached. Lorenzo braced himself, uncertain of his direct superior's reaction to this unexpected turn of events. Paolo's face was solemn as he stood before Lorenzo. Then, to everyone's surprise, he offered a small but genuine smile. The tradition of the Swiss Guard continues, but perhaps today it has also evolved. He said quietly, so that only Lorenzo could hear. Well done, Bianchi. Lorenzo felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He would remain a Swiss Guard after all. But something had fundamentally changed, not just for him, but perhaps for the entire institution. Sophia Rossi was wheeled forward now. Her eyes were bright with tears as she took Lorenzo's hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "Matteo would have been so proud." Father Domenico stepped forward holding an envelope, the Pope's final, unsent letter to Sophia. "His Eminence thought you should have this," he said, placing it in her hands. As Sophia read the letter, tears flowed freely down her cheeks. When she finished, she looked up at the assembled dignitaries and officials. "Matteo always believed that God works in unexpected ways," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for a woman of her age. "He would see God's hand in bringing this young man to help me, and in the events that followed." Cardinal Conti addressed the assembly once more. "From this day forward, members of the Swiss Guard will receive training not just in protocol and security, but in discernment, the wisdom to know when compassion must take precedence over procedure. The Benedict XVI initiative will extend this training throughout the Vatican, ensuring that while we honor our traditions, we never forget our primary calling to show Christ's love to all." The announcement was met with another round of applause, louder this time. Lorenzo noticed that even some of the most traditional cardinals were nodding in approval. As the formal ceremony concluded, Lorenzo found himself surrounded by well-wishers, fellow guards, Vatican officials, even diplomats who wanted to shake his hand. The story had clearly touched something deep in everyone present. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo sat with Sophia in one of the Vatican gardens. Her family had gone to pack her things from the medical center, giving them a moment alone. "Did you know," Sophia said, "that when Benedict was just a boy, he once got in trouble for breaking school rules to help a smaller child who had fallen in the playground. All the other children just stood and watched, following the rule about not leaving their assigned area during recess. But Matteo ran to help without hesitation." She smiled at the memory. "I didn't punish him. Instead, I used it as a lesson for the whole class about the spirit of rules versus their letter." He never forgot that lesson. Lorenzo thought about how that small moment in a schoolyard so many decades ago had rippled forward through time, shaping a pope's philosophy and eventually, in some small way, influencing Lorenzo's own instinctive decision at the funeral. "I'm glad I got to know him through you," Lorenzo said. "And I'm glad he got to be honored through you," Sophia replied. "Some traditions are meant to be preserved. Others are meant to be gently reshaped by compassion, knowing which is which. That's the real wisdom." As the setting sun cast a golden glow across the Vatican gardens, Lorenzo reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. By breaking protocol to help an elderly woman, he had not only honored a pope's last wish, but had perhaps helped the Church itself remember one of its most fundamental teachings, that love must always be the highest law. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of the Swiss Guard who broke protocol would be told around the world. But for Lorenzo, the most important part was not the public recognition or even keeping his position. It was the knowledge that when faced with a choice between rigid adherence to rules and responding to human need with compassion, he had chosen as Pope Benedict would have wanted, as anyone truly committed to service should.